It was a cold Tuesday morning in London, the kind of morning where the sky looks like someone forgot to turn on the lights. Gray clouds hung low over the city, and a bitter wind cut through the streets like it had somewhere important to be. Inside King's Cross Station, thousands of people rushed in every direction. Businessmen in expensive suits talked loudly into their phones. Students with heavy backpacks scrolled through their devices while somehow avoiding collisions with strangers. Mothers pushed strollers while juggling coffee cups and shopping bags. Everyone was busy. Everyone had somewhere to go. Nobody had time to stop. In the middle of all this chaos, tucked away in a corner near Platform 9, sat an old piano. It was one of those public pianos that cities sometimes place in stations and airports, painted in bright colors with a small sign that read, "Play Me." The idea was simple. Anyone could sit down and play a few notes, bringing a little music into the everyday rush of city life. Most days, the piano sat ignored. Sometimes a child would bang on the keys while waiting for a train, producing more noise than melody. Occasionally, a teenager would play a few bars of a popular song before getting embarrassed and walking away. But for the most part, people walked past it like it was invisible, just another piece of furniture in a station full of distractions. On this particular morning, a man approached the piano. He moved slowly, almost hesitantly, like he wasn't sure if he belonged there. His clothes told a story of hard times. He wore an old gray hoodie, faded and worn at the elbows. The kind of hoodie that had clearly been through many winters. His jeans were patched in several places, and his shoes looked like they had walked 1,000 miles on concrete. A small backpack hung from his shoulders, stuffed with what appeared to be everything he owned. His face was weathered, with deep lines around his eyes that suggested he had seen more than his fair share of difficult days. His beard was untrimmed, flecked with gray, and his hair was hidden beneath a knitted cap that had probably been dark blue once, but had faded to something closer to gray. He could have been anywhere between 40 and 60 years old. Life had made it hard to tell. A security guard near the entrance noticed him and watched carefully. Homeless people sometimes cause problems in the station, and this man certainly looked like he might be homeless. But the man wasn't bothering anyone. He wasn't asking for money or blocking the path. He simply stood near the piano, looking at it like he was meeting an old friend he hadn't seen in years. A group of teenagers sitting on a nearby bench noticed him, too. They nudged each other and whispered, some of them already pulling out their phones. They weren't interested in his music. They were interested in recording something they could laugh about later. A homeless man trying to play piano? That would make for an amusing video to share with friends. A woman walking past with her young daughter pulled the child closer and quickened her pace. She didn't want any trouble, didn't want to deal with whatever this stranger might ask for. It was easier to look away, to pretend he wasn't there. This was the reality of being invisible. When you look a certain way, when life has pushed you to the margins, people stop seeing you as a person. You become a problem to avoid, a story they don't want to hear. Nobody wonders who you used to be or what dreams you might have had. Nobody thinks about the path that led you to this moment. The man didn't seem to notice the stares or the whispers. His attention was focused entirely on the piano. He reached out and touched the wooden surface gently, almost reverently, the way someone might touch a photograph of a loved one. Then he sat down on the bench. For a long moment, he just sat there. His hands rested in his lap, and his eyes were closed. If you watched closely, you might have noticed his lips moving slightly, like he was having a silent conversation with himself. Or maybe he was praying, or maybe he was just remembering something from long ago. The teenagers on the bench were getting impatient. One of them called out, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "Go on then, give us a song." His friends laughed. A few other commuters glanced over, curious despite themselves. The man opened his eyes. He looked down at the keys, black and white stretching out before him like an old familiar road. Some of the keys were chipped. The piano clearly hadn't been tuned in months. It was far from perfect. But then again, so was he. He placed his hands on the keys. His fingers were rough and calloused, the hands of someone who had done hard physical work. They didn't look like the hands of a musician. They looked like the hands of a laborer, cracked and worn by years of struggle. He pressed down on a single key. The note rang out, clear and lonely, cutting through the noise of the station. A few people nearby turned their heads at the sound, then turned back to their own concerns. One note wasn't impressive. One note wasn't worth stopping for. Then he pressed another key, and another. The melody started slowly, so quietly that you had to strain to hear it over the sounds of rolling suitcases and distant announcements. It was a simple tune at first, the kind of thing a beginner might play. Nothing remarkable. Nothing that would make you stop and listen. The security guard relaxed a little. Just another person passing time at the piano. Nothing to worry about. The teenagers on the bench looked disappointed. One of them put away his phone. "Told you it would be rubbish," he muttered to his friend. They started gathering their things, ready to move on to something more interesting. But then something changed. The man's fingers began to move faster. The simple melody started to grow, adding layers and complexity like a flower slowly opening its petals. What had been a whisper became a conversation. What had been a single voice became a choir. The teenager who had put away his phone stopped mid-motion. His friend's mouth fell open slightly. Neither of them moved. A businessman who had been rushing toward platform 12 slowed his pace without realizing it. Then he stopped completely, his train suddenly forgotten. A young mother with a crying baby paused to adjust the blanket around her child, but as the music reached her ears, she found herself frozen in place. And something strange happened. The baby stopped crying. The infant just lay there, eyes wide, listening. The security guard stepped closer, no longer watching the man with suspicion, but with something else entirely, something like wonder, because the music that was now flowing from that old, out-of-tune piano was unlike anything any of them had ever heard in a train station. It was unlike anything most of them had ever heard anywhere. The man's rough, calloused fingers danced across the keys with a precision and grace that seemed impossible. His eyes were closed again, and his body swayed gently with the rhythm. He wasn't just playing the piano. He was speaking through it, telling a story without words, painting pictures with sound. The simple melody had transformed into something magnificent. Notes cascaded like waterfalls, built like mountains, floated like clouds. There was joy in some passages, deep sadness in others, and moments of such beauty that people felt their throats tighten with emotion they couldn't explain. One by one, people stopped walking. They turned toward the corner where the old piano sat. They gathered around, forming a growing circle of strangers united by a shared experience. Phones came out again, but this time not to mock. This time to capture something extraordinary. The teenagers who had laughed were no longer laughing. They stood among the crowd, their faces showing the same awe as everyone else. And in the center of it all, a man in worn clothes and patched jeans played music that seemed to come from somewhere beyond this world. Music that made people remember things they had forgotten. Music that made them feel things they had buried deep inside. Nobody knew who he was. But everybody knew that something remarkable was happening, and this was only the beginning. The crowd grew larger with every passing minute. What had started as a handful of curious onlookers had swelled into a sea of people, maybe 200 or more, all packed into that corner of King's Cross Station. They stood shoulder to shoulder, strangers pressed against strangers, yet nobody complained. Nobody pushed. Nobody tried to leave. They couldn't leave. The music wouldn't let them. The man at the piano had no idea how many people were watching. His eyes remained closed, his body moving with the melody like a tree swaying in a gentle wind. His fingers flew across the keys with a speed and precision that seemed almost inhuman. Yet there was nothing mechanical about his playing. Every note felt alive, breathing, pulsing with emotion. He transitioned from one piece to another without pause, moving through musical styles like a traveler passing through different countries. One moment, the melody was classical, the kind of music you might hear in a grand concert hall performed by musicians in formal attire. The next moment, it shifted into jazz, playful and unpredictable, full of surprises. Then it became something else entirely, something that didn't have a name, something that seemed to come straight from his soul. In the crowd, a young woman stood near the front. She was a music student at the Royal Academy, in her final year of studying piano performance. She had spent her entire life surrounded by music, had attended countless concerts, had studied under some of the most respected teachers in the country. She knew talent when she heard it. She knew technique. She knew what it took to play at the highest level, and what she was hearing right now made no sense. The piece the man was playing was one she recognized. It was a famous composition by Chopin, one of the most difficult piano pieces ever written. She had spent 2 years trying to master it herself and still couldn't play it perfectly. Her professors, people who had dedicated their entire lives to music, struggled with certain passages. But this man, this homeless-looking stranger in worn clothes, was playing it flawlessly. Not just flawlessly, he was playing it better than she had ever heard it played before. And he was adding his own variations, improvising on top of one of the most complex pieces in the classical repertoire, making it sound easy when she knew it was anything but. Her hands were shaking. She pulled out her phone and started recording, but her eyes never left the man's fingers. How was this possible? Who was he? Where had he come from? Standing a few feet away, an older gentleman watched with tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. He made no move to wipe them away. He was a retired music teacher, 73 years old, and he had spent 50 years of his life trying to share the beauty of music with young people. He had seen talented students come and go. He had attended performances by world-famous pianists. He thought he had experienced everything music had to offer. He was wrong. The melody the man was playing now reached inside him and touched something he had almost forgotten existed. It reminded him of his late wife, who had passed away 3 years ago. She had loved music too. They used to attend concerts together, holding hands in the darkness as melodies washed over them. He hadn't been able to listen to music since she died. It hurt too much. But this was different. This music didn't make him want to run away from his grief. It made him want to sit with it, to acknowledge it, to accept it as part of his story. The tears weren't tears of sadness, not entirely. They were tears of release, of healing, of something he couldn't quite name. Nearby, a little boy sat on his father's shoulders watching the man at the piano with wide, amazed eyes. He was only 5 years old, too young to understand the technical brilliance of what he was hearing, too young to know about Chopin or jazz or musical theory. But children don't need to understand music to feel it. And this little boy felt it deeply. He tugged on his father's hair and whispered, "Daddy, the piano is singing." His father nodded slowly, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. "Yes, buddy. It really is." The security guard, who had watched the man with suspicion earlier, now stood at the edge of the crowd with his arms crossed, not in hostility, but in wonder. He had worked at this station for 12 years. He had seen thousands of people sit at that piano. He had heard everything from terrible noise to decent amateur performances. He had never heard anything like this. His radio crackled with a message from his supervisor asking where he was, reminding him he was supposed to be doing his rounds. He reached down and turned the volume off. His rounds could wait. Some things were more important than schedules. The teenagers who had laughed and mocked earlier now stood in silence. The one who had called out, "Give us a song," looked different somehow. The smirk was gone from his face, replaced by something softer, something more open. Later, he would tell his friends that this was the moment he decided to take guitar lessons. He would say that something changed inside him that day, that he finally understood why his grandmother always talked about the power of music. The man at the piano played on, oblivious to the impact he was having on every person around him. Or perhaps not oblivious. Perhaps on some level he knew exactly what he was doing. The melody shifted again, becoming quieter, more intimate. The cascading notes slowed down, giving way to something gentle and heartbreaking. It was the kind of music that makes you think about the people you've lost, the chances you didn't take, the words you never said. It was the kind of music that strips away all your defenses and leaves you standing there, exposed, vulnerable, human. A woman near the back of the crowd had stopped on her way to a job interview. She was running late now, very late, and the job was important. She needed it. Her family needed it. But she couldn't make herself walk away. She stood there with her briefcase hanging from her hand, tears rolling down her face, thinking about her mother who had always believed in her, who had always told her she was capable of great things. Her mother had passed away 6 months ago, and she hadn't let herself truly grieve. There was always something else to do, always another responsibility to handle, always a reason to push the pain aside. But the music wouldn't let her push it aside anymore. The music demanded that she feel it, all of it, right here in the middle of a train station surrounded by strangers. And somehow, that was okay. Somehow, crying in public didn't feel embarrassing. It felt necessary. The man began to build the music again, layering notes on top of notes, creating something that sounded like an entire orchestra was playing instead of just one person on an old, out-of-tune piano. The melody soared upward, climbing higher and higher, reaching for something just beyond grasp. People in the crowd found themselves holding their breath without realizing it. Time seemed to slow down. The noise of the station faded into nothing. There was only the music, only this moment. Only the connection between a stranger at a piano and the hundreds of hearts he was somehow touching all at once. A train conductor standing at the entrance of Platform 9 forgot to check tickets. A coffee shop worker stopped mid-pour, letting the cup overflow as she stared toward the corner where the music was coming from. 2 businessmen who had been arguing about a contract fell silent, their disagreement suddenly seeming very small and unimportant. This was the power of music, real music. Music played not for applause or money or fame, but for something deeper. Music played because it needed to be played. Music that existed for its own sake, pure and uncompromising. The young music student near the front was crying now, too. She wasn't sad. She was overwhelmed. She had spent years studying technique, practicing scales, perfecting her posture and hand position. But watching this man play, she realized there was something her teachers had never been able to teach her. There was something beyond technique, beyond practice, beyond all the theory in the world. There was soul. And you either had it or you didn't. This man had it. He had more of it than anyone she had ever encountered. The question that burned in her mind, the same question that was beginning to form in the minds of others in the crowd, was simple but impossible to answer just by watching. Who was this man? How could someone who looked like he had nothing actually have everything that mattered? What was his story? Where did he come from? And why was he here playing the most beautiful music any of them had ever heard on a random Tuesday morning in a train station? The man showed no signs of stopping. The music continued to flow from his fingers like water from a spring, endless and pure. And somewhere in the crowd, a phone was recording everything. Within hours, this video would be uploaded to the internet. Within days, it would be seen by millions. And the question everyone was asking would soon have an answer. But for now, in this moment, there was only the music, and that was enough. The music reached its peak like a wave crashing against the shore. The man's fingers moved so fast they seemed to blur, producing sounds that filled every corner of the station. It was loud now, powerful, impossible to ignore. People on the upper levels stopped and leaned over the railings to see what was happening below. Shop workers stepped out of their stores. Even the pigeons that usually flew around the rafters seemed to settle and listen. Then, just as suddenly as it had built up, the music began to soften. The thundering notes gave way to something quieter, something tender. It was like watching a storm pass and seeing the first rays of sunlight break through the clouds. The man played the final notes slowly, deliberately, letting each one hang in the air before fading into silence. And then it was over. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The station, which was always filled with noise and chaos, fell completely silent. It was the kind of silence that felt sacred, like the pause between heartbeats. Then someone started clapping. It began with one person, a single pair of hands coming together somewhere in the middle of the crowd. Then another person joined in, then another. Within seconds, the entire crowd erupted into applause. It wasn't polite clapping, the kind you give at the end of a school performance. This was something else entirely. People were cheering, some were whistling, many were still crying, applauding through their tears. The man at the piano opened his eyes slowly, as if waking from a deep dream. He looked around at the crowd surrounding him, and for a moment, he seemed confused. Perhaps he had forgotten where he was. Perhaps he had been so lost in the music that the rest of the world had simply disappeared. He stood up from the bench slowly, his movements stiff like someone who had been sitting for too long. He gave a small nod to the crowd, a humble gesture that seemed completely out of place given what he had just done. It was the kind of nod a shy child might give after a school recital. Not the bow of a master who had just delivered one of the greatest performances anyone present had ever witnessed. Then he picked up his small backpack from the floor, slung it over his shoulder, and started to walk away. The crowd parted to let him through, but people reached out to touch his arm, to shake his hand, to thank him. An older woman grabbed his sleeve and said something to him with tears in her eyes. He smiled at her gently, patted her hand, and continued walking. A man in a business suit pressed a 20-pound note into his palm. The pianist looked at it for a moment, then quietly handed it to a young mother standing nearby who looked like she could use it more than he could. The music student who had recognized the Chopin piece pushed her way through the crowd. Her heart was pounding. She had to know. She had spent years studying music, years learning about the great pianists of history and present day. Something about this man was familiar. Not his face exactly, but his style. The way he moved his hands. The way he interpreted the music. She had seen it before, she was sure of it. But where? She finally caught up to him near the exit. "Excuse me," she called out, slightly out of breath. "Sir, please wait." The man stopped and turned around. Up close, she could see his face more clearly. His eyes were a deep brown, warm but carrying a weight of sadness that was hard to miss. There were scars on his hands, she noticed, not just calluses from hard work, but actual scars. Thin white lines across his knuckles and fingers. "That was incredible," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I study piano at the Royal Academy. I've never heard anyone play like that. The Chopin piece, the way you added those variations, it was... I don't have words for what that was." The man smiled, a genuine smile that softened the hard lines of his face. "Thank you," he said quietly. His voice was gentle, cultured, not at all what she had expected. "That's very kind of you to say. Can I ask, who are you? Where did you study? Who was your teacher?" The man's smile faded slightly. He looked away toward the busy street outside the station, where black cabs and red buses rumbled past in an endless stream. "That was a long time ago," he said. "A different life." "But surely," she started. "I should go," he interrupted, not unkindly. Thank you for listening. It means more than you know." He turned and started walking again. The music student stood frozen, watching him disappear into the crowd of pedestrians outside the station. Within seconds, he was gone, swallowed up by the city like a drop of water returning to the ocean. But she couldn't let it go. There was something nagging at her, a memory trying to surface. She pulled out her phone and opened her music streaming app. She went to her saved playlists, the ones she had created years ago when she first fell in love with piano music. She scrolled through the albums, looking at the covers, reading the names. And then she found it. Her blood ran cold. It was an album cover from nearly 20 years ago. The image showed a young man in his late 20s, handsome and clean-shaven, sitting at a grand piano in a concert hall. He was wearing a formal black suit and looking directly at the camera with eyes that sparkled with joy and confidence. But those eyes, she recognized those eyes. They were older now, sadder, hidden behind years of hardship and pain. But they were the same eyes. She looked at the name on the album. She read the biography. Her hands began to shake so badly she almost dropped her phone. Back inside the station, the crowd was slowly dispersing. People were checking the time, suddenly remembering trains they needed to catch and appointments they needed to keep. The spell was breaking. Real life was flooding back in. But not everyone was ready to let go of what had just happened. The retired music teacher was talking to the security guard, both of them shaking their heads in disbelief. "I've seen a lot of performances in my life," the old teacher said. "I saw the greats play when I was young. This man, he belongs in that category. He's not just good, he's one of the best I've ever heard." The security guard nodded. "I don't know much about classical music," he admitted, "but I know what I felt, and I've never felt anything like that before." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the exit. The music student had come back inside, and she was talking rapidly to anyone who would listen. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with shock. "You don't understand," she was saying. "I know who he is. I know who that man was." People started gathering around her again. Phones came out once more. Someone had already posted their video of the performance online, and it was starting to spread. Comments were flooding in from people who hadn't been there, people who were watching from their homes and offices around the world. "Who?" someone asked. "Who was he?" The music student held up her phone, showing the album cover from 20 years ago, the young man at the piano, the name printed in elegant gold letters. "This is him," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is the man who just played for us." People leaned in to look. Most of them didn't recognize the name. Classical music wasn't exactly popular with the general public, but a few people did recognize it. The retired music teacher recognized it immediately. His face went white. "That's impossible," he said. "That man disappeared 15 years ago. He just vanished. Nobody knows what happened to him. There were rumors he died." "He didn't die," the music student said. "He's alive. He was just here. He was playing that piano, and none of us knew. None of us had any idea who we were listening to." The security guard looked at the album cover, then back at the exit where the man had disappeared. "So who is he? Someone tell me in plain English. Who did we just see?" The retired music teacher took a deep breath. When he spoke, his voice was filled with a mixture of awe and sorrow. He was the greatest pianist of his generation, maybe one of the greatest who ever lived. He played for presidents and kings. He sold out concert halls around the world. Critics called him a once-in-a-century talent. He paused, looking toward the exit as if hoping the man might somehow reappear. And then, 15 years ago, he walked away from everything. No explanation, no goodbye. He just disappeared. The music world never recovered from losing him. People wrote books about his disappearance. Documentaries were made. Nobody ever found him. The crowd stood in stunned silence. "Until today," the music student finished. "Until right now. He was here the whole time, living on the streets, playing for strangers who had no idea who he was. Outside the station, the man in the worn hoodie walked slowly down the busy street, his small backpack bouncing gently against his back. He had no idea that his life was about to change forever. He had no idea that the world was about to find him again. The video spread like wildfire. By the time the sun set over London that evening, it had already been viewed over 2 million times. By midnight, that number had climbed to 10 million. By the next morning, it was trending in 37 countries, and every major news outlet in the world was running the story. "Mystery pianist stuns London train station," read one headline. "Homeless man revealed as legendary musician who vanished 15 years ago," read another. "The greatest comeback nobody saw coming," declared a third. Television crews descended on King's Cross Station like hungry birds. Reporters stood in front of the old painted piano, telling and retelling the story to cameras. They interviewed the security guard, who was suddenly famous for being the first person to watch the performance. They tracked down the retired music teacher, who cried on camera as he described what he had witnessed. They found the teenagers who had mocked the man before he started playing. And those young men looked genuinely ashamed as they admitted they had judged someone based on their appearance. The music student became an overnight celebrity. She did interview after interview, showing her phone with the old album cover, explaining how she had made the connection. Music experts were brought on television to analyze the video, breaking down the technical brilliance of the performance frame by frame. They talked about his finger placement, his pedal work, his interpretation of the Chopin piece. They all agreed on one thing. This was a master at work. This was someone who had not lost his gift, despite everything. But where was he? That was the question everyone wanted answered. Police were asked to help locate him. People posted photos and possible sightings on social media. A hashtag started trending, with thousands of people sharing the story and asking if anyone had seen the man in the worn gray hoodie. For 3 days, he was nowhere to be found. Then, on a rainy Thursday afternoon, a young woman working at a small church in East London posted a message online. She worked at a community center attached to the church, a place that served hot meals to people experiencing homelessness, and she recognized the man from the video. "He comes here sometimes," she wrote. "He's quiet, keeps to himself. I've served him soup. I had no idea who he was. None of us did." Within hours, reporters had swarmed the area. They set up camp outside the church, cameras ready, microphones waiting. The woman who had posted the message was overwhelmed by the attention and quickly regretted saying anything. She worried that she had betrayed someone's privacy, someone who clearly wanted to be left alone. But it was too late. The world had found him. He appeared the next morning, walking slowly down the street toward the church just like he had done countless times before. He was wearing the same clothes, the same worn hoodie, the same patched jeans. He carried the same small backpack. He looked exactly like what most people would assume was just another homeless man struggling to get by. But now, everything was different. He stopped when he saw the crowd of reporters. For a long moment, he just stood there in the rain, water dripping from his knitted cap, looking at the cameras and microphones pointed in his direction. His face showed no anger, no frustration, only a deep, profound tiredness. A reporter pushed forward, shouting a question. "Sir, can you confirm that you're the pianist from the video? Can you tell us why you disappeared 15 years ago? Where have you been all this time?" More questions came flying at him from every direction. The noise was overwhelming. Flashes went off as photographers captured every expression on his weathered face. He raised his hand slowly, and something about the gesture made everyone fall quiet. Perhaps it was the dignity in his posture. Perhaps it was the calm in his eyes. Whatever it was, the shouting stopped, and a hush fell over the crowd. "Yes," he said simply. His voice was soft but clear. "I am who you think I am." The reporters erupted again. but he raised his hand once more. "I will answer your questions," he continued, "but not here, not like this. These people," he gestured toward the church behind him, "they took care of me when I had nothing. They fed me. They gave me shelter on cold nights. They treated me like a human being when the rest of the world had forgotten I existed. I won't turn their place of kindness into a circus." There was something in his voice that commanded respect. The reporters, for all their pushiness, actually stepped back. "Tomorrow," he said, "I will tell you everything tomorrow. But today, I would like to eat my soup in peace." And with that, he walked past them, through the doors of the community center, and disappeared inside. The reporters stayed outside all day, but true to their word, they didn't follow him in. Perhaps they sensed that pushing too hard would backfire. Perhaps some of them felt something they hadn't felt in a long time in their profession. Perhaps some of them felt shame. Inside the community center, the man sat at his usual table in the corner. The volunteers brought him soup and bread, just like they always did. But now they looked at him differently. Now they knew who he was. Now they understood that the quiet, gentle man, who always said please and thank you, who always cleared his own dishes, who sometimes helped sweep the floors after meals, was someone extraordinary. An older volunteer, a woman in her 60s who had been working at the center for 20 years, sat down across from him. She didn't ask him any questions about his past or his music or why he had given up everything. She just sat with him in comfortable silence, the way friends do. After a while, she spoke. "You don't have to do it, you know. The interview tomorrow. You don't owe anybody anything." He looked up from his soup and smiled at her. It was a sad smile, but there was warmth in it, too. "I know," he said, "but maybe it's time. I've been hiding for a long time, maybe too long. What made you play that day? At the station? You must have known someone might recognize you." He thought about the question for a long moment. "I don't know," he admitted. "I've played at public pianos before, dozens of times. Nobody ever noticed. I suppose I got careless. Or maybe—" He trailed off. "Maybe what? Maybe I was tired of being invisible. Maybe some part of me wanted to be found." He shook his head slowly. "I've been running from my old life for 15 years. That's a long time to run. Maybe my legs just finally gave out." The volunteer reached across the table and placed her hand over his scarred, calloused fingers. "Whatever you decide to do tomorrow, whatever you say or don't say, just know that we're proud of you. Not because of who you used to be, but because of who you are now. You're a good man. That's all that matters to us." His eyes glistened with tears he refused to let fall. "Thank you," he whispered. "You don't know how much that means." That night he stayed in a small room at the back of the church, the same room he had slept in many times before when the weather was too harsh to stay outside. He lay on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, knowing that tomorrow everything would change. For 15 years he had been nobody. Just another face in the crowd, just another man trying to survive. There was freedom in that anonymity, freedom from expectations, freedom from the weight of being who he used to be. But there was loneliness too, deep, crushing loneliness, the kind that settles into your bones and never quite leaves, the kind that makes you wonder if you made the right choice, the kind that makes you question everything. Tomorrow he would tell the world his story. He would explain why he walked away from fame and fortune. He would reveal the tragedy that had shattered his world and the grief that had driven him into hiding. But tonight, in this small room in a church that had shown him more kindness than he deserved, he allowed himself to remember. He remembered the life he used to have. He remembered the person he used to love. And he remembered why music, despite everything it had cost him, was still the only thing that made him feel alive. Tomorrow, The world would finally learn the truth. The next morning, he kept his promise. He walked out of the church into a gray London drizzle, facing a crowd of reporters that had doubled in size overnight. News vans lined the street. Cameras from television stations around the world pointed at him like weapons. Microphones were thrust forward, hungry for words. But this time, he was ready. Someone had set up a small table and chair outside the community center. He sat down slowly, folded his hands in front of him, and looked out at the sea of faces, waiting for him to speak. The volunteers from the church stood behind him like a protective wall, their presence a silent reminder that he was not alone. He took a deep breath and began. 15 years ago. I had everything a man could want. I had fame. I had money. I had sold-out concerts in the greatest halls on earth. Critics called me a genius. People lined up for hours just to hear me play. I thought I was the luckiest person alive. He paused, his eyes growing distant. But the truth is, none of that mattered. The concerts, the awards, the standing ovations. None of it. Because the only thing that truly mattered to me was waiting at home. My daughter. The crowd fell absolutely silent. Even the reporters stopped fidgeting with their equipment. She was 7 years old when she got sick, a rare illness. The doctor said there was nothing they could do. They gave her 6 months. She held on for 8. 8 months of hospitals and treatments and prayers that went unanswered. 8 months of watching the light slowly fade from the eyes of the person I loved more than anything in this world. His voice cracked slightly, but he pressed on. She used to sit beside me when I practiced. From the time she was a baby, she loved the piano. She would put her tiny hands on mine while I played and giggle when the vibrations tickled her fingers. As she got older, I started teaching her. She was talented, more talented than I ever was at her age. I used to dream about the day we would perform together on stage. He stopped and looked down at his scarred hands. That dream died with her. A reporter in the front row wiped tears from her eyes. She had covered wars and disasters and tragedies of all kinds. She thought she had built walls around her heart. But something about this man's quiet grief was breaking through those walls. After she passed, I couldn't play anymore. Every time I touched the keys, I heard her laughter. Every melody reminded me of her. The piano that had been my greatest joy became my greatest pain. I couldn't bear it. I couldn't bear any of it. The fame, the attention, the expectations. Everyone wanted me to keep performing, to keep being the person I had been before. But that person died in that hospital room, holding his daughter's hand as she took her last breath. He looked up at the cameras. So I ran. I gave away my money. I sold my homes. I disappeared. I thought if I could become nobody, if I could erase myself completely, maybe the pain would stop. Maybe I could outrun the grief. A bitter smile crossed his face. I was wrong, of course. You can't outrun grief. It follows you wherever you go. It sleeps beside you at night and walks with you during the day. It becomes part of you, woven into your bones. But something else happened too. Something I didn't expect. When I stopped being famous, when I stopped being the great pianist everyone admired, I started to see the world differently. I met people who had nothing but still shared what little they had. I met kindness in the most unexpected places. I learned that there are heroes everywhere, quiet heroes who never get applause or recognition, who simply do good because it's the right thing to do. He gestured toward the volunteers behind him. These people saved my life. They didn't know who I was. They didn't care. They just saw a person who needed help, and they helped. That's more meaningful than any award I ever received. A reporter raised his hand and asked the question everyone was thinking. Why did you start playing again? After all those years of silence, why did you sit down at that piano in King's Cross? The man was quiet for a long moment. My daughter's birthday was the next day, he finally said. She would have been 22 years old. Every year on her birthday, I find a piano somewhere and I play for her. I play all the songs she loved. I play the songs I was teaching her before she got sick. It's my way of keeping her alive, of honoring her memory." He smiled, and for the first time, there was genuine warmth in it. "She used to say that music was how angels talk to people. I don't know if that's true, but when I play, I feel like she can hear me. I feel like we're together again, just for a little while. That's why I played that day. I wasn't performing for the crowd. I was playing for her." The silence that followed was profound. Hundreds of people stood in the rain, tears streaming down their faces, united in their shared humanity. Finally, someone asked what would happen next. Would he return to performing? Would he record new music? Would he reclaim his place in the classical music world? He shook his head slowly. "I'm not interested in being famous again. I've lived that life. It wasn't for me, but I have been thinking about something else." He looked toward the community center behind him. "There's a small school a few streets from here. It serves children from families that don't have much money. Most of those kids will never have the chance to learn music. Their families can't afford lessons or instruments. Music is treated as a luxury, something only wealthy people can have." His eyes hardened with determination. "That's wrong. Music belongs to everyone. It's not just for concert halls and rich audiences. It's for everyone who has ever felt joy or sorrow, hope or despair. It's for every child who has ever wondered what it would feel like to create something beautiful." He stood up from the table. "So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to teach. I'm going to sit with children who have never touched a piano and show them the magic that lives inside those black and white keys. I'm going to give them what my daughter never had the chance to become. Musicians, artists, dreamers." He paused. "I know it's not a grand comeback. I know it won't make headlines for very long, but I think my daughter would be proud of me, and in the end, that's all that matters." 6 months later, he did exactly what he promised. He taught at that small school 3 days a week, working with children who had never seen a piano up close. He was patient with them, gentle, never raising his voice or showing frustration. He celebrated their small victories and encouraged them through their struggles. Some of those children discovered a gift they never knew they had. Some of them would go on to pursue music seriously. All of them would remember the quiet man with the sad eyes who made them feel like they could do anything. He also gave one concert. Just one. It was held in the auditorium of his daughter's old elementary school, the school she had attended before she got sick. The audience was made up of children, teachers, and a few parents. There were no cameras allowed, no reporters, no tickets sold. He walked onto the small stage, sat down at an old upright piano that was slightly out of tune, and began to play. He played softly at first, and this time everyone knew exactly who he was, but more importantly, they knew who he was playing for. A little girl who had loved music, a little girl whose laughter still echoed in every note. A little girl who had taught her father that fame means nothing and love means everything. When he finished, the children erupted in applause. They didn't clap because they understood his technical brilliance or his place in music history. They clapped because the music had made them feel something: joy, wonder, hope. And sitting at that piano, surrounded by the sound of children cheering, the man finally smiled. Not a sad smile, a real one. For the first time in 15 years, he was home.